it's Q&A time. So I'd like to invite journalist and head Matilda Judge Susan Hetherington Page to the stage. She's already here. As well as Ingrid for a live Q&A about Seasons of Love. And this is Ingrid, the illustrator and artist. All right, so Q&A begins.
Can we have the microphone, please?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, hello. I have known Bea for almost ever, but that will not stop me from putting on my journalist hat and asking the hard questions. Firstly, Bea, you're 22, right?
Yes.
Why do we need to know what you know about love? What's your vision that you're sharing with us?
Ooh. Start with a hard one. So I think, I'm very aware that I am 22 and my experiences with love and falling out of love and with heartache and despair are maybe not as intense as my peers. But I created this book and I worked together these stories because I actually wrote most of these stories at a time when I was falling out of love and experiencing a bit of despair. So most of those stories actually came from that experience and that event. And for me, it would have been so lovely to know that I can get through it and I will get through it. And whilst my beautiful family, my friends were like, yes, you're gonna get through it, and I did listen to them, but it would have been nice to kind of have that in literature as well, and so that was very accessible. And so that's why I wove all these stories together and why love is this umbrella for all of these stories, because I think, again, love is so universal, but it shows that, these characters go from feeling love and feeling accepted to then feeling immense hurt and pain, and then you see them journey through that pain, and then you see them come to this hopeful place, and then they start back on that journey. So it's this idea that this cycle is never ending and it keeps going, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have your heart broken once a year.
Thank you.
But it was this idea that we're constantly going on this journey, and again, this is just my journey. I mean, not every character or not every story is my experience. But as you know this as well, as writers, we put ourselves in everything we write. Doesn't matter what it is, we are in there. So there's a part of me embedded in each narrative. But yeah, that's kind of why I created it.
And when it started, was the intention always to make a book, or did these things exist on their own to begin with?
Yeah, so I have always wanted to publish a book. This little bit. Ingrid's like, yeah. So I originally had a different idea for a book, and that kind of manifested itself into a play that I wrote called Anonymous, which we did a few years ago. And so I was kind of that book's kind of manifested, and I don't know, I feel like
It's
I should
already
choose something
done.
else. It's already done, yeah. And then, as I said, last year, I wrote a lot of different stories, and it was actually my mum and Harry who encouraged me, and were like, why don't you put these together? And then that was kind of how the collection of short stories happened, but I never had it in my mind to publish a collection of short stories. That was never something that I thought I could do, or something that I'd be interested in. So it just manifested itself in the moment.
How difficult is it to expose that much of yourself to the world? I told
So the people that know me very, very well, and even maybe the ones that know me very well, might not know which story is about a specific experience. They're the stories that I've wrote about, for example, former relationships or dating, whatever you want to call it, I've actually read them all that story that I wrote about them. So they will know. I feel like we're Taylor Swift in that way.
Harry, which one is yours?
It is really the stories about like divorce and separation, like that was all my lived experience. There is a story in there which is I think the heaviest story in the book, probably not appropriate for you guys, which is very much my experiences, and that was really, really hard for me to write, and that I don't want to say the name of that story. I don't want to say the name of that story. But for me, that was really hard to write, but I felt like I should write it because, again, like I never had a short story or literature to look at that had that story in it that I could relate to.
Congratulations everyone here for participating in V's therapy. Well done. There is a truth in all of us when we write. Now, Ingrid, we've seen the beautiful work out in the foyer. What's the difference in the process when you are illustrating somebody else's vision rather than strictly your own?
I think to start with, I should say that Virag was a dream client. She got in contact with me and she's like, I know you're very busy, but I've got this project. And at the time I was like, oh, I don't think I can take it on, there's too much going on. But then I was like, no, it's Virag, I have to take this on. And it's always, I met Virag through doing community theatre, and so now that I don't do theatre anymore, it's nice that we've been able to collaborate creatively in a different way. But it is always tricky when you're working with a client because it's their vision and your vision, and sometimes those things don't meet. So I think I was quite lucky with Virag where everything I sort of came up with, she was like, yeah, love it, which isn't always the way. Like, I actually think it's good to have a bit of push and shove and work out ways. The other thing too is that Virag sent through some of the visuals of what she had in mind for the book, and it was a bit different to my usual style, which you probably noticed if you saw the stalls out there. We work digitally with these illustrations, and I think because you want the book to do the main talking and the illustrations to accompany it, and so yeah, the illustrations are really there just to bring out the elements of the stories, and Virag was really great in communicating her ideas for it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It absolutely does. What is it with butterflies?
Do you want to answer that?
Sure. So that was actually one of our first discussions. Was I was like, I want butterflies, and Ingrid was like, oh. You know when you do things subconsciously and you don't realise you've done that until kind of, good old hindsight. And I've kind of always associated the feeling of loving yourself, of accepting yourself, of being in a healthy relationship as this feeling of butterflies. And not butterflies in your chest, but butterflies like coming throughout your, up your throat and through your mouth when you speak, and when you beat. Like that's just, that was the kind of the imagery. And also probably helped that my mum loves butterflies. And so, sorry mum, I'm bringing you to this Q&A. And so I kind of, I guess that manifested itself in that too, because obviously like I could talk about how much I love my mum for hours, but this is not the time for that. Sorry mum.
Always the time to tell your mother how much you love it.
But yeah, so there's this idea of, and then I was like, oh, well, if this is like butterflies is love and, that feeling, then, well, what's the opposite? And there was this idea, okay, so that's moths. So then there's this idea of like when you are really hurt, when you're in despair, when you're in a dark place, when something traumatic or tragic struck, it's this feeling of moths in your stomach. And then when those moths start to go away, then you start to get these like caterpillars crawling in your chest. And then when they're about to hatch, they go in their cocoon, and then you're back and you're in that beautiful state of accepting yourself and loving yourself and loving the people around you. Yeah.
What advice would you give to anyone who wanted to self-publish a book? Don't? Find a rich relative?
So just for context, so I finished writing these stories on the 31st of December last year. Harry and I went away on a holiday, and I was like, I'm going to finish these last 8. I'm going to smash them out. It's going to be done. And I did it. And so basically from January to May, I was contacting a bunch of independent publishers and commercial publishers as well in all around Australia, sending manuscripts, and kind of they all responded saying that we like your work, but there's just no market for short stories at the moment, unfortunately. And so that was kind of a mixed feeling of like, oh, like my work isn't awful, they like it, but they just can't publish it. And so then during that process, like I was working on Handle with Care, and I was working on Dear Adults for 2 productions I created and was in and all that stuff. And so I didn't really have a lot of time to seek kind of the independent publishing route, self-publishing route, and what that would look like. So as soon as kind of those productions ended, that was when I got into the researching stage of what does that look like. And the independent publisher I use, they're called In-House Publishing, they're in Underwood, and they're a family-run business, and they were just so supportive throughout the journey. So the book is basically everything I wanted. So whatever change like myself or Ingrid or Harry wanted to make, like they made it. Like the cover was exactly how I asked Ingrid to draw it, and they then did the thing. And it was like, even like the butterflies, like they positioned the butterflies. They did all that for us. And yeah, look, publishing independently is a cost. I'm very fortunate that I've made back most, if not all of those costs through pre-sales and through bookstores. I've actually had 2 bookstores that have completely sold out of Seasons of Love already, and it's only been on shelves for 2 days, which is amazing, and it gives me hope that, you know, maybe I can do another one soon. But yeah, I think, look, it is an expense. However, I was very fortunate, as I said, that they were a really lovely kind of group of people to work with, and they were so accommodating. Whatever questions I had, they would answer them straight away. You know, like I was on prac for most of the time that this book was getting made, and so I couldn't go in and talk to them. So it was a lot of like back and forth and calls, and they were so accommodating. And yeah, I think I'm so proud that I did that. And obviously I know it was a cost. I know a lot of people don't have that opportunity to do that because it is a little bit costly. But I'm so glad that I did it, because at the end of the day, as a writer, as a creator, as a theatre maker, like you want people to see your work. You want people to experience your work. And that's why you publish, that's why you put on a show, that's why you write a musical, because you want to share those experiences and those emotions with people. So I'm really proud of doing that, and then I have a physical artifact here.
And Ingrid, is book illustration something you've done a lot of or plan to?
I did illustrate a book when I was in university. It was not-for-profit for women's education, and that was an experience because you don't realise how long it takes until you do it. That's more like, it was a great experience. It was just the time. But this is the first that I've done of this sort of kind, and I'm working on a picture book as well that will come out, I think, next year.
Give us a plug. What's it called?
It's called Metropolis, published by Story Torch Press. And interestingly, I was last year looking into self-publishing as well, because I really wanted to illustrate a book. And so when Virag said she was going down that route, like you say, it's gone. It's I could just project it. It's a really big undertaking, and I think if anyone can do it, we all know that it's Virag, because she's just a powerhouse. Apparently it was just me.
No, it's not really working.
We can project.
When you imagine somebody reading this book, who is it and how are they reading it? Are they starting from cover to cover? Are you dipping in occasionally depending on how you feel? Am I only allowed to read the summer book stories in summer? Or what's your vision?
Yeah, so it's really up to you where you start. It's kind of, as I said, you experience an emotional journey if you go from summer to summer. But it's also up to you. Like, that's why what I found really fascinating about short story collections, it's similar to poetry. Like, you can open up a page and just read whatever poem you feel like reading. And I know that's what I love personally a lot about poetry, is that it has that flexibility. Because I know sometimes, as I imagine you all do with work commitments, for those of us that are adults, with work commitments, is sometimes it's hard to commit to reading a novel. And so yes, I kind of wanted like these bite-sized stories where you could read when you're drinking your morning coffee, you could read it before you go to bed. Again, depending on from which section, like I probably wouldn't read an autumn story before I go to bed, because you might get the feels, and you won't be able to sleep, so maybe don't do that. But yes, that was the kind of the idea of it, is that you can choose wherever you want to start. Like you might want to start at the end and work your way back, and that's totally okay. That's completely up to you. I thought it was really important to publish it before summer arrived, so that for those, if you would like to start reading it, it would be perfect, in my opinion, if you would start reading it like in December, because then you'd actually follow along that journey. So that was kind of the idea of publishing it in like October, if you have that. That being said though, everyone's favourite season is spring. So
you've been told. Okay, so there is no book of rules to follow, so the heart makes up its own. What are the rules, do you reckon?
For like
In
the
terms of
heart, or
that
just
question,
love?
Love, the heart.
Ingrid?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Did I use it in a sentence? I'm going right to the back. I'm not doing acknowledgements. This one.
Have you got the book right there? I love that! Oh, that's so clever.
Love is a foolish and dangerous game. There is no book of rules to follow, so the heart makes up its own.
Oh, that's my quote.
It's yours. So, what rules is your heart made up then?
I have students in the audience.
What's the abridged?
I'm joking.
Make it up.
See? Improv. Here we go.
There you
Improv.
go.
We learned about all of this year.
Yeah.
I think everyone's heart heals and recovers in different ways. I think there are some experiences that stay with us for quite a long time. I think everyone's very different in that regard. I think, for me, I think you find that you've healed, or your heart is ready to, again, like, love yourself, love someone else, love the people around you, when you're able to relive those past experiences or memories, or able to like touch those objects again, or watch those movies, or listen to that music, and have this moment of serenity, and be like, reflect on that previous memory with that previous person, it's to relive that in a new light. I think that for me is the moment of being able to accept that you had this really joyous experience, very loving, affectionate experience or relationship with someone. Again, relationship doesn't mean romantic relationship, it can mean any relationship you want it to be. And then, and be able to experience that again in a new light. And I think that's probably one of the hardest, in my opinion, in my personal experience, I think that's one of the hardest things about going through grief and grieving, is that, when you meet, like in terms of a romantic relationship, when you meet someone new, and you're reliving all these experiences, but now it's with someone else. And for the heart, that's very tricky to navigate. Like, it's very tricky to not feel sorry in those moments for the love that was lost, but then to allow your heart to open itself up to the moments that's coming along. I think that's the point.
May I have the mic?
Yes, please.
All right, I am now going to wander out into the audience. Do we have questions?
Say no!
I've got one.
Thank you.
She does. Virag, I've been very right, because I'm so old and I've had so many relationships. You continually talked about the need to have some literature that reflected your feelings, your hurt feelings, your ups and downs. I think there's a lot of librettos and what we call pop songs, but there's been some brilliant writings and poetry in music. And why did you turn to them to explain your feelings?
Yeah, so I love poetry. So I actually, yes, I read a lot of poetry during that time. I did listen to a lot of music, but I felt like kind of the literature that I normally consume didn't have as much of that content.
So for example?
As in like what literature didn't have that content?
No, what novels you were wearing?
Yeah, so in terms of like the kind of romantic relationship ending, it was like, for me it was a very bittersweet ending. So there was none of this, I'm angry at you, I'm angry at you. It was this thing of, wow, this ended and this really hurts for both of us. And so for me, I guess, there's not a lot of even pop songs out there that kind of commemorate that feeling or that speak to that feeling, to the point that like I think I created my own, I think on Spotify, like my own bittersweet, I don't know, playlist, and I think we've got about like 200 followers on there, so I was like, here we go. But yeah, and so it was a thing of like a lot of even like movies and popular culture is this idea of, you know, this relationship fishes and ends, and then there's anger or there's hate, and that wasn't my case. And that's kind of mirrored through my writing as well. Like that's why my writing is so bittersweet, and even the beautiful stories, the hopeful ones, like maybe, you know, at the end of that story, like the last paragraph is what hits you, and that's when it's like, oh, actually, like Virag's fooled us all. Yeah, so it was just that kind of bittersweet texture I felt was missing from a lot of, the content I consume. And yeah, I did read a lot of poetry, and even poetry was like, I actually read more of the good old ancient Greeks and all my old kind of traditional volumes, because I felt that encapsulated that a lot more. I also, and this is kind of a little bit of a segue from your question, but one of my most fundamental things that I want to do in this book was to provide a voice for children. And so you'll notice that in every section there's at least 2 stories, if not more, that are narrated through a child's voice. And again, like this is kind of my philosophy as an arts educator, is that, you know, children, they experience as much as we do, but in different varying ways and different scales. And again, like a lot of those, as I said before, like a lot of the parent separation stories in there were very similar to my own. And I, upon writing that and then reading it, I had this moment of, wow, I would have loved to have read this story when I was 8 or when I was 9, and I didn't have a story like that. So it was so that kind of bittersweetness I felt was, and that voice I felt was missing from a lot of novels and literature as well. Yeah, sorry, that was a really big response.
Anyone else daring to take them up? Oh, right. Had enough, right? Oh.
What's the most terrifying thing about publishing a book?
Well, it's the fear that people won't like it. Like that's with whatever you put out. It's the fear that people won't like your show or they won't like your voice. And for me, it was very much that my writing is quite image-based. So even before I published this book, like when I was thinking of where it would be, like in the bookshop, in the libraries, I was imagining it would be near the poetry section, because that's kind of my writing style. And so yes, that was a really big thing. I remember one of my first press interviews I did, I said to the journalist, like, you know, like if prose isn't your thing, then like don't buy it, because you're not gonna like it. Like you're not gonna enjoy that, because I love my metaphors, I love my imagery, and for those that have worked with me creatively in theatre, you know how much I love my imagery, like to the point that I'll set a whole auditorium in the dark and ask my lighting designer to work on that. But yeah, so it's a fear of people not enjoying it, but also I guess because there's a lot of, I guess, like costs involved with publishing as well, is this fear of like, well, what if I don't make that money back? And I'm sure like Ingrid can probably talk a lot more about that as well. Is this, you know, as sole traders, you know, there's often that thing of, you know, you invest X amount in a product and that fear of, well, what happens if I don't make it back? Like, you know.
We both have recently, I release a calendar every year and Virag releases a book. I won't say what for every year, but and so whenever getting there, it's a huge upfront cost, and it's so nerve-wracking because you're like, what if no one buys it and I just have 1,000 calendars in my house? Which I don't know if you've ever seen that many calendars, but it's a lot. It's like a wall. And so
a spectacular wall.
I would encourage Virag to use Possible for pre-orders because it just, I think it gives you a little boost of confidence when you can actually see and you feel like you're working to get to a target as a community. And yeah, anyway, it's scary, but when it works, it's great. Yeah.
So V, one final question. What next?
I actually, for Love Your Bookshop Day yesterday, I actually went and did some book signings at the gorgeous, I don't know if you've been there before, but Red Hill has a really gorgeous bookshop called Scrumptious Reads, which has Seasons of Love there as well, and has a bunch of Ingrid's cards and bits and bobs there too. And I went into the store and there was a customer there, and like I immediately went to the book and I was like, oh my god, it's there, like wow. And the customer was like, oh, I was actually reading the first story of that book, and I was like, oh. And we had this beautiful conversation about the work and everything. And yeah, it was kind of in that conversation when he actually asked the same question, so what's next? And I would actually love to publish an anthology of poems or a collection of poetry. I think that in terms of like publishing, I would love to do that. I'd also, as I think a lot of us playwrights would love to publish some plays one day. But the market for that is a bit different, so gotta work a bit harder to get to that one. But yeah, so poetry, I'd love to publish a collection of poetry because I already have quite a lot of content for that, I feel.
Is it hate next time?
See, like, okay. I think hate is a very strong word, and I don't think I've really ever used the word hate. Maybe, actually I probably shouldn't say this because Harry's filming. No, I think hate is a very strong word. I don't think so. I think that's not really my personality. I don't think I'd publish something on hate. That being said though, again, this potential future collection of poetry could have some poems that are a little bit more anger-filled than others. But I don't think hate is something. I don't know. I don't think. I mean, Ingrid's known me for a while, so
The title Seasons of Hate doesn't
the sequel.
Ingrid, I suggest you start working on your ethical moths. Very, very
Dark.
nice moth.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. I'm going to come over to here to Harry.
Hazza. Good.
Has.
Oh.
I was waiting for that.
Oh.
It's only fair.
Yeah.
How on earth do you go about editing your girlfriend's and still be in a relationship?
Basically just taking out a lot of semicolons was the main thing.
Yeah, semicolons are ugly. Good choice.
Yeah, so replacing a lot of those with full stops. And then just, I mean, I'm not saying this as a biased boyfriend, but like her work was amazing to start with. So my job was made easy to just, tidy it up and polish it in little places here and there. But the original work stood so strong on its own that, yeah, it was a pleasure to be the editor for this book.
He's a keeper. All right.